Hello. So sorry for the for where I am. It's quite noisy where I live, so I thought I'd do the video here. And yeah, happy Easter, everybody. So or happy Resurrection Day. So I've just written something this week that just about the historical evidence supporting the resurrection of Christ. And did he rise from the dead? Is it reasonable to believe that he rose from the dead? So here goes. Today's Christians celebrate the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. Everyone else enjoys eating Easter eggs, in brackets, lol. So whatever your religion or non-religion, you'd be impacted in some way by Jesus Christ. So what does history say though? What do historians and scholars believe? So today I will present a 12-point argument about the resurrection and ask the question, is it reasonable to believe that he was resurrected and that he is God? So Christianity hangs on whether Jesus rose from the dead. The Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15:4, "And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith." So first I will talk about the 6 minimal facts argument, which is by Dr. Gary Habermas and Dr. Michael Licona, who are professors at Liberty University and Houston Christian University. Now the 6 points, the minimal facts argument, 6 points, is a popular argument for the resurrection that is strongly supported by historical evidence and accepted by a consensus of scholars, including non-Christians and skeptics like atheist Dr. Bart Ehrman, who is the world's most famous or leading Bible critic, and he's, as I said, an atheist. Those 6 points will be followed by another 6 points, which are the 10 non-Christian sources within 150 years that support the resurrection, the 300 plus Old Testament prophecies of Jesus, number 9, a brief account of the Bible's historical accuracy, 10, the New Testament's comparison with other religious texts and people in antiquity, 11 is the explosion of Christianity, 12, Christianity still being the world's largest religion despite freedom to leave at any time. So point number 1, Jesus definitely died by crucifixion. Now this means that he was alive and he was a real person. So this is confirmed by Roman historian Tacitus. He was alive from 56 AD to 120 AD. He wrote in his Annals 1544, Christus, from whom the name Christian has its origin, suffered the extreme penalty, which means crucifixion, during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. So this confirms Jesus' execution under Pilate. Furthermore, Tacitus was not a Christian, and he wrote with disdain for Christians. And then to back that up, you've got Lucian of Samosata, and which I won't say because I'll try and keep this as quick as possible. And then another one, Thales, AD 50 to 52. He tried to explain the midday darkness as a solar eclipse. And this is also quoted by Julius Africanus. Jesus' crucifixion is also confirmed by Jewish historians such as Josephus from AD 37 to AD 100. He wrote in Antiquities of the Jews, "At this time there was a wise man called Jesus. Pilate had condemned him to be crucified. Those who had come to love him did not give up their affection for him. On the 3rd day he appeared to them restored to life." I just note that the last bit, the 3rd day he appeared to them restored to life, that is debatable whether or not that was added at a later date. So I just put it in there just to be completely transparent. But what is 100% fact is that Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate. The Babylonian Talmud, which is in the 3rd to 5th century AD, Sanhedrin 43a, on the eve of Passover, Yeshua, which means that Yeshua was hanged. Hanged often refers to the crucifixion in ancient Jewish literature. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth that he was going to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy. Oh, it's gone all dark in here. Sorry. And then Christian sources such as the New Testament, which along with the Old Testament is the best historical source for antiquity, and in particular the four Gospels and the book of Acts, which were all written within 60 years of Jesus' death. The Gospels detail the resurrection, while Acts and the New Testament books are based around his death, resurrection and early church. More is spoken about this in point number 2. So point number 1 finishes by saying that this is also confirmed by leading atheist Bible critic Bart Ehrman, who actually wrote 15 reasons within 100 years of why Jesus was crucified. And in his book, Did Jesus Exist? In 2012, he wrote, "The crucifixion of Jesus by the Romans is one of the most secure facts we have about his life." I'll just turn that engine off again. Point number 2. His disciples believed he rose and appeared to them. So we read about the resurrection and the disciples' reaction in the following New Testament texts. So Matthew chapter 28, Mark chapter 16, Luke chapter 24, John chapter 20 to 21. Also read about it in Acts, for example, Acts 2:32. This Jesus God raised up again, to which we are all witnesses. The Apostle Paul's letters. So Paul confirms that the disciples, especially Peter, James, and the rest of them, believed and testified to the resurrection. This meant that the gospel message was preached immediately. Furthermore, Paul writes that Jesus appeared to 500 who they could speak to confirm. 1 Corinthians 15:3-8, Paul cites an early creed. He was raised on the third day, and that he appeared to Cephas, who's Peter, and then to the 12. Galatians 1:18-19, Romans 10:9, and then other letters like 1 Peter 1:3. He has given us new birth to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Hebrews refers to Jesus as being brought back from the dead. Revelation, written by John on the island of Patmos. Now, some people would say, well, the Bible is not a reliable source because it's biased. But you have to remember that the Bible wasn't actually the Bible until like the mid 4th century. So prior to that, they were just like biographies of Jesus' life, or they were letters like epistles. So they weren't actually designed to be a part of the Bible. So these are actually like really accurate historical sources, and I'll talk a bit more about later why they're so accurate. So point number 3, the early disciples and the apostles were willing to suffer and die for their belief. They consistently put themselves in situations that they knew would lead to persecution and possible death. So their lives, the disciples, were deeply transformed as a result, such as Peter, who went from denying Jesus to leading a thriving church. Their sincerity shows that they truly believed it. People don't willingly die for something they know is a lie. The transformation, marked by renewed hope and commitment, fundamentally shaped the rapid expansion of early Christianity. So in Acts 4, we learned of Peter and John being arrested. Peter was imprisoned again in Acts 12:3-19. The early church was scattered by persecution, Acts 8:1-4. Stephen was murdered or martyred. And it says how there was a great persecution broke out and believers were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. So, and it is believed that only John, who was exiled to Patmos, was not martyred. So that's church tradition that claims that. I'll talk a bit more about that later. Point number 4, the Apostle Paul was headed to Damascus to arrest Christians, was converted after claiming to see Jesus. So we read about in Acts how the Apostle Paul was like witnessing St. Stephen being stoned to death. And he went to the Sanhedrin to ask for a letter to go to Damascus so he could go to the synagogues to stop Christianity spreading up into Europe, because that was a major trade route. And there's a lot of Jewish in Damascus. But on the road to Damascus, he witnessed Jesus and then he became a Christian. Now, the Apostle Paul, financially, in terms of status, to do with, in terms of having a nice life, it would have made sense for him to stay as a Pharisee. But he converted to Christianity and he ended up like being shipwrecked and likely martyred in Rome. He had a very difficult time. He was thrown in jail, beaten up. Paul wrote 25% of the New Testament words, including Corinthians, which was written within 20 years of Jesus' death, and in which we learn of the pre-Pauline creeds, which shows that Peter, James and Paul and John were all preaching Christ crucified straight after the resurrection. So Dr. Michael Licona states that 11 of the 13 Pauline letters are highly likely written by Paul. This is called the undisputed Pauline epistles, which is scholarly consensus. However, he personally thinks that all 13 are written by Paul. So, again, you might think, oh, well, the book of Acts, is that reliable? Well, did you know that in the last 16 chapters of the book of Acts, there are 84 historical facts and 11 leaders from the time that have been confirmed by historians today, which shows that the New Testament is a very valid historical document. Point number 5, James, Jesus' skeptical brother, also converted and was martyred. So James did not believe in Jesus during his ministry, but he became a leader of the Jerusalem church. James did. His martyrdom was recorded by Josephus in AD 93, who records that James was brought before the Sanhedrin, which is the high court, and he was stoned. Also, it was recorded by Hegesippus in AD 170 and Eusebius in 320 AD. Christian history states all the apostles and disciples, minus John, were martyred. There is a YouTube debate between Dr. Josh McDowell and Bible critic Paul Ogier, who both investigated this. It was actually Josh's PhD thesis. In the debate, Josh McDowell explained his doctorate, where he said that 5 of the 14, so I've got 11 disciples, Peter, Paul and James, were highly probable of being martyred. Paul Ogier didn't dispute this. Paul Ogier is an atheist ex-Christian who's got a real gripe against Christianity as well, and he didn't dispute it. Point number 6, the tomb was found empty. So while this is not proof of the resurrection, this is another piece of evidence for the case. In Matthew 28:11-15, this records that the Jewish leaders claimed the disciples stole the body. This is significant because it acknowledges that the tomb was empty. Otherwise, they would have just pointed to the body. They would just say, oh, look, it's just over there, or we've got over here. Even though this is in the Bible, it's often treated as an embarrassing admission by early critics, which makes it a historically valuable clue. Justin Martyr, 150, dialogue with Trypho, he says that the Jewish opponents still claimed in his day that, I quote, his disciples stole him by night from the tomb. This shows that the stolen body theory was circulating, which assumes the tomb was empty. And Tertullian, AD 200, says the same thing, that the Jewish denied the resurrection, saying the body was stolen. However, during this time, Jesus was a high-profile prisoner. The guards would literally lose their life if they let him go, because you read about that in the book of Acts, where Paul and Cephas? No, Paul and Barnabas probably. There's an earthquake in Philippi, and they get out of jail, and the prison guard goes to kill himself because he thinks they're going to run off. But Paul says, no, don't kill yourself, because they knew that they would severe punishment if they let the prisoners go. Next point. Early creed in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8. I briefly talked about this earlier. So Paul refers to Jesus being buried, then raised, and then seen by up to 500 witnesses. And he says most are still alive today. So the burial appearances implies the tomb was left empty, and this creed is very early, within just a few years of Jesus' death. Next point, the silence of the opponents. So no ancient critique of Christianity, whether they're Jewish or Roman, ever produced Jesus' body or claimed the tomb was still occupied. If the tomb still had a body in it, Christianity could have easily been debunked. Then you've got criterion of embarrassment. So Jesus' resurrection was revealed first to women. This is what's called the criterion of embarrassment, which would have been embarrassing in a patriarchal Jewish society, which this makes it more likely. So I've got another 6 points from 7 to 12. Number 7, there are 10 non-Christian sources within 150 years that support the resurrection story. So in this book, which I recommend, called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, page 222. Excuse me. I'm going to read these 12 points very quickly, and a lot of them are similar to the previous ones I mentioned. So this is, like I said, from non-Christian sources. Jesus lived during the time of Tiberius Caesar. He lived a virtuous life. He was a wonder worker. He had a brother named James. He was acclaimed to be the Messiah. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He was crucified on the eve of the Jewish Passover. Darkness and an earthquake occurred when he died. His disciples believed he rose from the dead. His disciples were willing to die for their belief. Christianity spread rapidly as far as Rome. His disciples denied the Roman gods and worshipped Jesus as God. So that, like I just said like 2 other times, is non-Christian sources within 150 years have confirmed all that. Point number 8, the Old Testament prophecies of Jesus. Again, I've got another little book here. So there are over 300 Old Testament prophecies about Jesus in the Old Testament, written from the 3rd chapter in Genesis, which is the first book. Genesis was likely written by Moses, who was recording oral tradition that dated back even earlier, and it was written approximately 14th century BC. Now, the earliest copy of these prophecies is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the complete Old Testament minus the Book of Ruth, and is carbon dated to approximately 250 BC before Christ. And this little pamphlet here is 100 of those prophecies fulfilled by Jesus. Very good pamphlet from Quran. So, point number 9, the Bible's historical accuracy. So, Christianity is a relationship with Christ, who is one part of the triune God. So we believe in one God, but 3 persons. We believe the Bible is the Spirit-inspired Word of God written by man. 2 Timothy 17, or Timothy 2:17, I'll put on the screen. But we hold it in very high regard as truth. Christianity grew to the largest religion in the Roman Empire over 280 years without the complete Bible we have today. So there were just letters and different Gospels being passed around and copied. Despite this, Christianity grew to over 50 million, which was over 50% of the Roman Empire at the time, and it was whilst being illegal. The Bible is the most accurate and reliable collection of sources, so 66 books, 27 books in the New Testament, we have for antiquity. When historians want to look at Middle Eastern history, the first source they go to is to the Bible. Most of it has been proven accurate and reliable by archaeology. This is the same for all the New Testament, including the Gospels. We have today over 5,000 manuscripts of the New Testament, which is amazing, considering prior to AD 350 they were written on papyrus, which is basically leaves from Egypt. Papyrus was very expensive. If you can check all this yourself. Just type into ChatGPT, how much would it cost for the Gospel of Mark to be written on papyrus? It'll work out all the maths for you, but it's a minimum of 3 months' pay just for that. And it was an illiterate society, so you'd have to find someone to write it down. And it would often disintegrate within 100 years. So you had to keep making copies. And severe persecution. A lot of these Christians were on the run. They were literally being hunted, severe persecution. And it started off as a small church. So I literally started off with a few people. But I can talk more about the Bible, but to save time, I was thinking of up here doing a talk about this another day. In that talk, I will talk about the criterion for the inclusion of the Gospels into the canon. I.e., it has to be eyewitness, has to be from antiquity, and why the Gnostic Gospels were rejected. For example, they were using different names in different places from 1st century Israel. And why don't we have the original documents of the New Testament? Like I briefly touched on, papyrus disintegrated within 100 years, and it was very expensive. So Jesus said to preach the gospel. So, he didn't say, write my words down, even though Matthew was making notes. P52 is the earliest fragment we have, which is of the Gospel of John, dated between 125 and 150 AD. But there are valid reasons for this. like I said, the early Christians were small in number, illiterate, and under severe persecution. Papyrus from Egypt was expensive and disintegrated within 100 years. Due to the church being small and poor, it could not afford to make copies. But as the church grew, and there were more and more being copied, today we have as many as 200 New Testament manuscripts prior to 500 AD. Greek was the lingua franca at the time, as well as complete Bibles such as the Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus, which were made from vellum, which is animal skin, from the 4th century. This is remarkable because, like I said, Christianity was illegal, illiterate society, papyrus and vellum were expensive. Oh, sorry, I've said that loads of times, I don't know. So I said another reason why the Gospels and the New Testament were written within 45 years is the historical accuracy. So without computers today, we wouldn't know what was being names and places from another country 200 years ago. But whereas I would know a lot about Sydney and different names today, and historians have confirmed the historical accuracy of the New Testament, especially the Gospels, because they say all the names and the geography and they get everything right. For example, where is it? Luke 10:30, a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So it's 17 miles downhill from Jerusalem to Jericho. So you'd only know that if you're actually from the area. And then, the Pool of Bethsaida, which John described where it is, and it was found in the 20th century, exactly the same. And then Luke 4:29, how Nazareth locations on a hill. There's lots of examples of this, whereas the Gnostic Gospels, for example, use names such as Didymius, Judas Thomas, which weren't names in 1st century Israel, and they didn't have Jewish customs. So that's just, briefly touching on why they're reliable. And then this is also backed up by Pliny the Younger in a letter to Emperor Trajan. He observed that the Christians worshipped the figure who they claimed was resurrected. And the Babylonian Talmud, as I mentioned earlier. So point number 10, the New Testament's comparison with other religious texts and people in antiquity. So in my apologetics handbook, which is brilliant, this is absolutely fantastic. Chart 43, Plato, 4th century BC. The earliest copy we have of him is 900 AD. So the gap is 1250 years. We only have 20 copies. Aristotle, 4th century BC. Earliest copy we have of his writings is AD 1100. So that's 1400 years. We have 5 copies. Homer, we have a lot of copies, 643. But again, there's a gap of 500 years between the earliest copy we have today and what he wrote. Whereas the new non-Greek New Testament manuscripts, the non-Greek of 19,200, and the New Testament manuscripts, in total 25,000 plus. So it's pretty remarkable how many documents we have of the Old and New Testament, and starting from 125 AD, despite it being expensive and then disintegrating and in a legal religion. Another thing I've got here is that there are more documents of Jesus than Emperor Titus Caesar. So the emperor of the Roman emperor at the time, there's more documents of Jesus we have today than him. And Jesus was like a son of a carpenter, and probably a carpenter himself. And the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79 in Naples was recorded in a letter by Pliny the Younger. We have in the original letters today, but 800 years later in a monastic scriptoria. So we only know of that volcano because of a document 800 years later. I haven't got it here, but I've got it upstairs somewhere. All the other religions, their documents are like so many years, hundreds of years later. For example, Hinduism, their earliest document is like the 3rd century AD, even though the religion apparently goes back many, many years. And so Christianity, all our documents are really early. Point number 11, the explosion of Christianity. So despite Christianity being illegal and there being no complete Bible for 280 years, Dr. Bart Ehrman, the atheist ex-Christian who's actually got a gripe against Christianity, I believe, writes that Christianity doubled every 20 years, with over 50% of the Roman Empire becoming Christian when it no longer became illegal at the Edict of Milan in 312 AD. If you consider those martyred, then it doubled every 10 years. This is all still 200 years before the Roman Catholic Church became powerful. Today, over 50% of the free world align with Christianity. Christians were heavily persecuted, such as what is recorded in Tacitus' Annals, Book 15, Chapter 44, where Nero blames the Christians for the fire of Rome, leading to them being hunted down and murdered. There were hundreds of religions at the time, including emperor worship, yet Christianity exploded to over 53% of the empire, despite being illegal and without a complete Bible. So point number 12, Christianity is still the world's largest religion at 33%, despite freedom to leave at any time. Now, Christianity in the Middle Ages had some unbiblical forced conversions, but today 99% of the Christian world, there is complete freedom to leave the religion. When you compare this to the second largest, Islam 24%, and even Hinduism at 15%, where it's virtually impossible to leave those religions because of the honour and shame culture. Under Sharia law in Islam, it's actually capital punishment to leave the religion. And I could talk more about this, but I don't want to turn this into like sort of backing out other religions. But it's very difficult to leave those religions. I know people who have been beaten up and like literally shunned by their family for leaving those religions. I'm not saying anything bad against Muslims or Hindus. If you're watching, love you both, love you guys. Add this to the millions of personal encounters that have been had from all backgrounds, which is documented on YouTube. Type into YouTube encounters with Jesus, and there are like multiple testimonies from Muslims, from Buddhists, from atheists. And Dr. Gary Habermas, I'm saying this from memory, so I've got to double check this, but I think he said there were 3 million officially documented encounters. I've had encounters with Jesus, but I don't want to make this video all about me. It's very, very real. So my summary, today I've explained 12 points, 6 of them with a minimal facts argument by Dr. Gary Habermas and Dr. Michael Licona. And I've explained why I believe it's the most reasonable belief that Jesus did rise from the grave and that he is God. So after those 6 points, I mentioned number 7, which was the 10 non-Christian sources within 150 years that support the resurrection, the 300 plus prophecies, Old Testament prophecies of Jesus. Number 9 was a brief account of the Bible's historical accuracy. 10, on that note, I'll do a longer video on that another time. And number 10, the New Testament's comparisons with other religious texts and people in antiquity. Number 11, the explosion of Christianity, despite being illegal without a complete standardized Bible. 12, Christianity still being the largest religion despite freedom to leave at any time. So presenting this evidence, I believe that whilst this does not prove that he rose from the dead, I think it's the most reasonable answer. Cool. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. God bless you. I hope you have a fantastic Resurrection Sunday or Easter Sunday. And yeah, God bless you in Jesus' name. Amen.